everyone, and welcome back to JS Outdoors. Today we're going to be continuing with our Basics of Firearms Ownership series. In this video, we're going to talk about safe firearms handling, specifically when we're handling firearms as an individual. In future videos, we're going to be providing clarity on how to handle firearms better when you're in a group or when you're with another person. But for now, we're just going to focus on the individual only. This video will also not be going over specific shooting tactics or techniques. However, this information is going to be a building block for moving into those tactics and techniques into the future. The safe handling habits we'll talk about today will apply every time you handle a firearm, whether that's when you're in your home, at the range, or in the field. Whether you're new to firearms or you've been around them for a while, this is fundamental knowledge that helps prevent negligent discharges and injuries when handling firearms. I made a video previously about the 4 basic rules of firearm safety, and we'll link that here. That video has very crucial components to firearm safety, and it is important that if you haven't seen that yet or you don't know what those 4 basic rules are, it might be beneficial to watch that first before continuing on here. However, you can always go back and reference it as well. This video is a part of a larger playlist on my channel, and I'm doing my best to release these videos in what I feel is more of a chronological order from start to finish of inquiring or wanting to learn about firearms into firearm ownership. That way, you can go to this playlist and kind of just start it from the beginning and then start to gain the knowledge to better prepare yourself for your firearm ownership or understanding better the responsibilities that are brought upon you when owning a firearm. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Subscription is free and it helps us grow the channel so that we can reach more people. Our goal is to provide content to as many people as possible for free so that way we can better help individuals with safe firearm ownership. If you have something to share during the course of this video, or if you have a future video idea, please leave us a comment. You can always reach out to us on our social media pages as well, both Facebook and Instagram, and those will be linked in the description of this video. If you have a relatable story regarding to firearm ownership or safe handling of a firearm, please also consider leaving a comment, because what that'll do is you can provide context to people who might not have thought about that scenario or that specific incident that you've dealt with before, therefore further growing the knowledge and the learning that we have in this space. One of the most important things you can understand about firearm safety is it is your responsibility 100% of the time, and there are no exceptions to that rule. You must be on 100% of the time when there's a firearm involved with what you're doing. The safe handling of a firearm is a mindset that you have to continuously be in. It's imperative that you are intentional every single time that you interact with a firearm, not only when what you're doing has a higher risk associated with it. Many unintentional shootings happen as a result of seemingly routine activities like cleaning, loading, or unloading the firearm. Similarly, when you're handed a firearm and told it's unloaded, you need to cancel out any risk of that person being wrong and safely check it yourself. These things matter as you are liable for everything that happens when you're in control of that firearm. They said it was unloaded is not a winning case when you're in court for an accidental discharge of that firearm. A common term that you'll hear when someone's referencing firearm safety is the term negligent discharge. And oftentimes people just assume you know what that means. To avoid any confusion, let's break down what that statement is. To start, we need to define the word negligent. Negligent, or acting with negligence, is a term that describes a culpable mindset of an individual. Negligence, as defined by Oxford Languages, is the failure to take proper care in doing something. Therefore, if you're not following the very available, and some would arguably say very obvious safety rules associated with firearms, you can be found negligently using that firearm. Next, we need to define the word discharge. So discharge, as defined by Oxford Languages, in the form of a verb, is to allow something to flow out from where it has been confined. So when we translate this into firearms, we're referencing the bullet or the projectile as it was confined in the bullet case and the chamber of the firearm. So combining these two words and again translating it into the firearms world, we can reasonably understand that discharging something with negligence is our inability to follow the simple safety precautions when handling a firearm, allowing for that bullet to discharge when we don't intend to actively do so. Finally, combining all of that we get the full picture of what it means when we say negligent discharge. A good place to start with firearm safety is the etiquette that you use when handling that firearm. People often think about firearm safety as when you're in a group. However, it's not the only time you should be practicing good, safe firearm handling. Even by yourself, it is important that you are practicing perfect safety and proper etiquette. What you're subconsciously doing is you're creating good training scars. We'll talk a little bit more in a future video about training scars, but simply put, you create good and bad training scars that your body then translates to subconscious reactions. If you practice the wrong things, then you are going to ultimately result in bad training scars. If you practice good things, good training scars. In high stress situations, your body will always revert back to that muscle memory, and you want to have a bank full of these good training scars to pull from, so that way you're always acting in the right. The following are a couple examples of good firearms etiquette, but it is not an exhaustive list. Hopefully these help you come up with your own good etiquette practices as well that you can implement into your daily use with firearms. Never treat a firearm casually or as a novelty. Never play with a firearm. Avoid unnecessary handling when you don't need to be handling that firearm. And never handle a firearm while distracted, tired, angry, or impaired. Using a firearm demands your full attention. And if you're unable to provide that full attention, you should consider if you should even be handling that firearm in the first place. One of the common things that you'll find with a negligent discharge investigation is that the individual who negligently discharged that firearm believed that it was unloaded when it really wasn't. It is imperative that you understand the status or whether your firearm's unloaded or not whenever you use it, or if you're handed another person's firearm, understanding the status of that firearm, which is again, whether it's loaded or unloaded. Simply put, it is up to you and only you to verify that firearm status every time you handle it. You can do this by removing the magazine if that's applicable with your firearms platform, locking the action back, and then physically with your hands and your fingers, and then also visually with your eyes, verify that there's not a bullet in that chamber and it is in fact empty. Do not rely on your memory of unloading the firearm previously if you lose sight or physical control of that firearm. If you do lose sight or visual control, you need to understand that there is a possibility that a bullet could have been put into that chamber. You can also not rely on someone telling you, hey, it's already unloaded, I checked myself. Every time you gain possession of that firearm, you own everything that happens with that firearm. So therefore, you need to visually check. Even if your buddy says, hey, I unloaded it, you need to make sure yourself that it is unloaded. Every single time you pick up a firearm, you should safely confirm the condition of that firearm, as well as always assume that the condition is that it's loaded. The following are some of the more common unsafe behaviors that are observed repeatedly during negligent discharge investigations. Now, this isn't specific to new firearm owners either. This is also something that is observed for people who have owned firearms and been around firearms majority, if not all of their life. So the more common examples are the individual assumed that the firearm was unloaded when it really wasn't. The individual handled the firearm while they were distracted or when they were impaired. And keep in mind, being impaired isn't always just with alcohol. It can also be when the individual is super fatigued or tired. That causes your mind mentally to have an impaired state. Also, the individual places their finger on the trigger routinely when they're handling the firearm. So again, creating bad training scars that then translate into subconscious bodily actions when we're using that firearm. And then also, the individual allows the muzzle to point in an unsafe direction when they're clearing it or they're inspecting it. You assume because you're clearing it or you're cleaning it that it is already unloaded, and then that's when those incidents happen. And there are examples of that I talk about in the 4 basic rules of firearm safety. Every one of these behaviors is preventable, and it relies on you and only you to make sure that it never happens. Like we talked about in the 4 basic rules video, if you follow the rules and safe practices, it is virtually impossible to have a negligent discharge, injury, or a fatality because of misuse of a firearm. A good way to think about safe firearms handling is that we're error-proofing our behaviors. Accidents happen, and often after an incident, we can look and see what all the different things we could have done were that would have avoided the incident altogether. However, if we're real with ourselves and we know that mistakes can happen, we can start to subconsciously build these habits that will help mitigate the opportunity for these mistakes to take place in the beginning. It is extremely important, specifically with firearms, because these mistakes can translate into serious physical injury or death. Some examples of these error-proofing habits can be always checking the firearm status or making sure the firearm is loaded or unloaded before we're handling it. Always maintaining muzzle discipline. If the firearm is not pointed at someone, you cannot shoot somebody. If the firearm's not pointed at something that you can damage, you can't damage it. And then always keeping your finger off of the trigger unless you're intending to fire. By removing that simple factor, we are now taking away a lot of the possibility for that firearm to go off unintentionally. By us continually doing these few simple things, we're creating a situation where if something terribly wrong was to happen, we have now mitigated all of the possible downstream effects and greatly reduced the potential of a tragedy. This doesn't stop with the few examples that I just listed either. There are countless things that we can do to mitigate the possible risk if a negligent discharge does occur. Every time you approach a new situation, you should stop yourself and think, what are the potential downstream effects if a negligent discharge was to occur in this moment? And then if one of those effects poses a possible risk, find out a way to mitigate that risk, if not completely avoid it altogether. So an easy one and a good example would be pointing the muzzle in a safe direction. Again, if you point it in a safe direction, it's going to be really hard to have an incident happen where there's serious physical injury or death. None of this information is intended to scare someone or make firearm ownership seem like it's super high risk. The firearm isn't the issue here. It's the manner of the user handling and using the firearm. Inanimate objects are not sentient, and they require interaction in order for their state of being to be changed. If you practice safe handling, you can expect to have no issues during your firearm ownership. Owning a firearm means that you are solely responsible. You are the only person who is responsible for what happens every time that firearm is used. However, building these safe habits protects you and others from incidents that have the potential to cause serious physical injury or death. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more firearms content tailored to the first time and new firearms owners. Also, just because someone's owned firearms and they've used firearms in the past doesn't mean that they won't learn something from this information. If you know someone who could benefit from this type of content, please share this video and encourage them to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for watching. Stay safe and get outdoors.